The night he found him, the rain had no mercy. Cold wind cut through the trees like knives, and thunder shook the muddy fields as if the sky was angry. Ramden, a poor village farmer, was walking home late from the market, his old shawl barely shielding him from the storm. That's when he heard it, a weak whimper coming from the side of the road. It wasn't a baby, but it sounded just as helpless. He turned his lantern toward the sound and saw a half-dead dog, soaked, bleeding from one leg, and too tired to bark. Most people would have walked away. Ramden didn't. He picked the dog up, tucked him inside his shawl, and whispered, "Let's get you home, friend." Ramden didn't have much, just 2 cows, a leaking roof, and a small patch of land. But he had enough to share. He fed the dog rice with ghee, cleaned his wound with haldi, and named him Birbal, after the clever courtier, because something in the dog's eyes felt wise. Days turned into months. Birbal recovered and never left Ramden's side. He guarded the cows, sat outside the hut at night, and followed Ramden's little son, Gopi, like a silent protector. But villagers began to laugh. You feed that dog more than you feed yourself. He's old now, can't even chase a squirrel. Useless. Ramden smiled and never answered back. He didn't feed Birbal for protection. He did it because when someone gives you silent loyalty, you don't put a price on it. Years passed, and Birbal grew slower. His bones ached. His tail wagged less. But his eyes still watched, always watching. Then came a night darker than most. The monsoon arrived early that year. The rain came down in sheets, and lightning cracked like swords in the sky. Ramden and his family were asleep when Birbal woke up suddenly. His ears perked. His nose twitched. He heard something no one else could, a hissing, unnatural sound near the backyard, a faint movement near the hut. Gopi was asleep on the floor near the kitchen. Birbal limped toward him just as the door creaked open, not from the wind, but from something else. In a flash, a cobra slithered inside, silent and deadly. No one saw what happened next, but they all heard the yelp, sharp, sudden, and heartbreaking. Ramden rushed out with a lantern and found the snake dead, and Birbal lying beside it, breathing heavily, his legs swollen, but Gopi untouched. Birbal had jumped in between. He took the bite. Ramden cradled him in his arms as thunder rolled overhead. Birbal's tail wagged once. Just once. That night, a life ended, but a family lived. The next morning, the villagers stood in silence as Ramden dug a small grave under the neem tree near the house. No one mocked him that day, not even the proudest ones. They stood quietly, hats in hand, as the sky, for once, didn't rain. Gopi placed a garland of wildflowers on the mound. Birbal's gift wasn't just saving a life. It was proving that even the useless, the old and forgotten can be heroes, without saying a single word. The wind that night howled like it had lost something. The kind of wind that slipped into your clothes, bit your skin, and whispered fear into your bones. The clouds above weren't just dark. They were angry, crashing into each other with deep groans of thunder. The road to the village was soaked in thick mud, and even the trees bent low, as if they too wanted shelter. Ramden walked alone, his feet sinking with every step. His jute bag, filled with leftover grain and half-rotten onions from a market, bounced against his back. The storm had hit earlier than expected, and now, even the moon had hidden away. As he turned the bend near the abandoned well, something made him stop. It wasn't a cry, not a bark, just the sound, faint, trembling, almost like a sigh, coming from the base of the neem tree that stood crooked by the road. Ramden squinted through the rain, lifted his dim lantern, and moved closer. There, lying curled in the wet dirt, was a dog, small, lean, with muddy fur and ribs showing through its thin frame. One of its legs was twisted at a strange angle, and its breathing was short, shivering with every exhale. The creature tried to lift its head, saw Ramden, and looked away, not in fear, but as if it had already accepted the worst. Ramden stood still. He had nothing to offer, no extra food, no warm place at home, no medicine. His wife was already angry about their own lack of oil and rice. What would she say if he brought home an injured animal? He turned to walk away, but his feet didn't move. The rain poured harder. soaking the dog further. The way its eyes stayed closed, not expecting rescue. Something inside Ramden twisted. He looked down at his lantern, then at the dog. It was easy to ignore something when you could pretend it wasn't your problem. But now that he'd seen it, heard that weak sound, he couldn't pretend anymore. He knelt down slowly. The dog didn't move, didn't growl or whimper. It simply lay there, quiet, as if too tired to care what happened next. Ramden slipped off his shawl, spread it on the ground beside the dog, and gently wrapped the creature inside. It was cold, soaked, and frail, but still alive. Barely. Ramden cradled the bundle in his arms, shielding it from the rain as best he could. He spoke softly. "Be, I've got you now." The journey back was longer, harder. His feet sank deeper into the road, and the weight in his arms grew heavier. The lantern flickered with every gust of wind, threatening to go out, but stayed lit, just enough to guide him home. When he reached his hut, his wife stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips. "What's that?" she asked, voice sharp, tired. "A soul," Ramden replied. She didn't understand at first, but she saw the dog, saw how its leg dragged, how its body trembled, and something in her gaze softened. She said nothing more as Ramden laid the dog near the stove, lit a fire, and warmed a bit of rice mixed with leftover milk. He fed the dog slowly, drop by drop, until the creature finally opened its eyes. They were golden brown, wide, and calm, as if it wasn't afraid of pain anymore, as if, in that moment, it understood everything. Ramden spent the next few days tending to the dog. He cleaned the wound with warm water and turmeric, cut up an old bedsheet to make a tiny splint, and fed it whatever little they could spare. His son, Gopi, watched with big, curious eyes, sometimes sitting beside the animal and softly humming songs as it healed. They named him Birbal, after the clever man in the king's court, because though he could not speak, something about him felt wise. He limped when he walked, but slowly he began to stand. He didn't bark, didn't bite, didn't demand anything. He simply followed Ramden wherever he went, across the fields, into the shed, near the pond. Quiet, watchful, always near. Villagers began to notice. "Ramden's lost it," one of them whispered, feeding an old, useless dog while he himself can't afford new slippers. "Watch. It'll run away the moment it's strong again," another said, shaking his head. But Birbal didn't run. He stayed. He guarded their cows when Ramden went to fields. He waited outside Gopi's school every afternoon until the boy returned. He sat in the shade when the sun blazed, and under the stars when the nights turned cold. He barked only once, when a snake entered their shed, and Ramden was too deep in sleep to hear it. Birbal had no voice, but his silence spoke volumes. Ramden never told anyone why he had stopped that night, why he had picked up a dying dog when he could barely carry his own burdens. But in his heart, he knew. Sometimes, it's not about what you can afford to give. It's about who you become when no one is watching. Over time, Birbal became part of the household in a way that no one had planned, but everyone had accepted. He no longer limped as badly, but the years had left their mark. His fur, once dull and muddy, had turned coarse with streaks of white. His ears twitched less, and he spent longer hours lying under the neem tree, eyes half open, always watching. Ramden's son, Gopi, had grown too, taller now, full of questions and always laughing. He no longer feared the dog like he once had. In fact, he'd come home from school, throw his bag to the ground, and rest his head against Birbal's belly, sharing his daily adventures as if the dog understood every word. And perhaps he did, because whenever Gopi was sad, Birbal's eyes stayed on him longer. Whenever he was excited, Birbal's tail moved just a little. But beyond the walls of their hut, opinions were forming. The villagers, always quick with advice they themselves never followed, had begun to whisper louder. "That dog is eating better than some of our children. Ramden is a fool. He's feeding a burden. What good is that animal now? He can't herd cows, can't bark at strangers, just sleeps and eats. He'll die any day now. What's the point?" Ramden heard them. Not directly, not always, but enough to know. Words find their way into places they don't belong. They seep under door frames, into rice sacks, into the corners of cracked walls. They settle in the air like dust, quiet, but visible if you look long enough. One afternoon at the tea stall, a man with an oil-stained turban said loudly, "That old dog's just dead weight. My son says he doesn't even move when someone passes. Just lying there like a ghost." There was laughter, but Ramdin didn't join in. He simply sipped his tea, placed the cup down, and said, "Some ghosts protect homes better than the living." That shut them up for a while. Back at home, Birbal still lay under the neem tree, eyes scanning the yard like he had every day for years. He didn't respond to the mockery. He didn't chase after the boys who threw pebbles or bark at the old women who muttered curses under their breath. But he noticed everything, like the crack in the shed wall, where rats had started coming in, or the way one of the cows had started limping, or how Gopi had started leaving school early without telling his parents. Birbal never said a word, but Ramdin often found him sitting beside that shed at night, or sniffing the cow's leg as if inspecting it, or walking halfway down the road after Gopi, before stopping and sitting there until the boy returned. Ramdin watched it all quietly. He noticed how Birbal would struggle to stand some mornings, how his body stiffened when the cold breeze came in through the fields. His tail wagged less now, and sometimes not at all, but his eyes, they were never tired. They still moved with quiet precision, like a guard who had no weapons left but refused to leave his post. Ramdin's wife once asked gently, "Should we stop giving the good rice? Just a little less?" Ramdin looked at her, then at Birbal, and shook his head. "He has never asked for anything. Not once. Let's not start counting now." The truth was, Birbal's presence had become more than familiar. It was grounding. In a world where the rains came late, where crops failed, where prices rose and friendships fell, Birbal had stayed. No demands, no drama, no disappointments. Just quiet loyalty every single day. When the village temple caught fire one winter night, and people screamed and ran, Birbal didn't move from his place under the neem tree. He only looked up once, saw Ramdin return home from the fields, and then laid his head back down. When Ramdin's neighbor had his goat stolen, he came banging on Ramdin's door. "Your dog didn't bark. Useless thing. What's the point if he can't even warn us?" Ramdin opened the door slowly. He looked at Birbal, sleeping peacefully near the kitchen. Then he turned to the man and said, "Because he didn't see a thief. He saw a man in need." The neighbor didn't understand, but Ramdin wasn't speaking to him. Birbal was slowing down, that was clear, but there was no desperation in it, no sadness. He still rose every morning before the sun, walked the perimeter of the house, sniffed at the corners, stretched his limbs even if they ached. He sat beside Gopi every evening when the boy did his homework by the lantern light, resting his head gently on the child's foot. And even when he slept, he never truly rested. One ear always twitched at every strange sound. One eye always remained just slightly open, because age had taken his strength, but not his sense of duty, not his loyalty, not the silent promise he had made under that rainy sky years ago, when Ramdin had carried him home in a shawl soaked with water and kindness. The village could call him useless. They could laugh. But Birbal didn't serve for their applause. His loyalty was to one man, one family, one small world that had once shown him mercy when no one else did. And for that, he gave everything he had, even when it looked like he had nothing left. The wind had shifted. That night was different. Ramdin had seen many monsoons in his lifetime, but this one rolled in like a warning. The clouds carried a silence that wasn't natural, a thick, humming quietness just before the sky breaks open. Even the birds had disappeared early into the trees, and the cows fidgeted in the shed without reason. Birbal had sensed it too. He hadn't eaten much that day. Instead of napping in his usual spot on a neem tree, he kept pacing the yard, slow and stiff, but alert. His ears twitched at sounds no one else seemed to notice. His eyes followed every shadow. Inside the hut, Gopi was curled on his mat near the kitchen wall, dozing with a storybook half open on his chest. Ramdin sat by the fire, patching an old slipper, and his wife was folding clothes in a corner. It was calm, even peaceful in its own quiet village way. But outside, Something was wrong. Birbal stood facing the door now, body still, nose in the air. The storm hadn't started, but the wind had grown sharp. It carried a scent he didn't trust, the kind that made his heart race even though his bones wanted to rest. And then he heard it, a soft rustle near the cow shed, too careful to be the wind. He limped toward the edge of the yard, stepping over old firewood, eyes narrowing into the darkness. There was movement, fast, smooth and low, something sliding through the weeds. He followed it to the corner of the hut, ears pulled back for standing on edge. And then he saw it, the glint of scales. A cobra, large, quiet, and deadly. It slithered with purpose, bypassing the cows, ignoring the fire, heading straight for the crack in the hut wall. Birbal tensed. His body ached and his limbs resisted, but instinct had already taken over. He had one task. Only one. Inside, Gopi turned in his sleep, murmuring something softly. The cobra slipped into the crack, tongue flicking, its body gliding silently across the mud floor, heading directly toward the warm body of the sleeping child. Birbal moved faster than he had in years. His legs buckled slightly as he lunged, forcing his way through the half-open door, knocking over a clay pot in the process. The sound woke Ramden, but by the time he turned, the dog was already inside, growling low, his body coiled protectively around Gopi. The snake raised its head, hissed sharply and struck. Birbal lunged forward, mouth open, catching the snake midair in his jaws. The bite landed, not on the boy, but on the dog's shoulder. Ramden shouted, rushing forward as Birbal shook the snake violently, flinging it against the wall. It slithered one last time before falling limp. Gopi was awake now, eyes wide in terror and confusion. Ramden pulled him into his arms, holding him close as his wife lit the lantern with trembling fingers. The glow filled the hut, revealing the full picture. The snake was dead. The boy was unharmed. But Birbal had collapsed. He lay on the ground, breathing heavy, his mouth slightly open, blood and foam mixing at the corners. Ramden knelt beside him, hands shaking as he touched the dog's head. Birbal's eyes moved, slowly, weakly, locking onto his. No bark, no cry, just a look that said everything. Ramden whispered, "You saved him, you." Birbal blinked once. His body shuddered gently, and his tail moved, just barely brushing Gopi's foot. Then stillness. The storm broke outside at that exact moment. Rain pelted the ground in wild sheets, thunder crashing over the fields. But inside the hut, the silence was louder than the sky. They buried him the next morning under the neem tree, the same place where he had spent most of his days. Gopi placed a garland of white flowers over mound, tears silently rolling down his cheeks. Ramden didn't cry, but he stood long, his hands folded, heart aching with the kind of pain only those who've known quiet loyalty can understand. The villagers came too. Not all, but enough. They said little. There were no jokes this time, no mocking. They had heard what happened. They had seen the snake's body, and they saw the boy alive. They saw the dog gone. A few of them brought milk. Others stood in silence. The man from the tea stall muttered something about duty under his breath. No one corrected him. That night, as the rain returned and the wind softened, Ramden sat on the porch, staring at the yard that now felt strangely empty. Gopi leaned against him, unusually quiet. The stars flickered to the clouds, and the neem leaves whispered gently in the breeze. And though Birbal was gone, the space he had filled didn't feel empty, because some gifts aren't measured in gold or grain or land. Some are measured in sacrifice, in the space between a breath and a bite, in the final act of an old soul who gave everything. Not for praise, not for reward, but simply because love asked for nothing less. Ramden and his son Gopi are sitting under the neem tree where Birbal was buried. The rain has stopped. Stars are slowly peeking through the sky. Fireflies glow softly. Ramden speaks softly, as if talking to the wind, or perhaps to Birbal himself. Ramden, Gopi, people think love speaks loud, that it shouts from rooftops, sings in poems, dances in music. But that dog, he never barked much, never howled, never begged. Yet he loved more than most people ever do in their whole lives. Gopi, Baba, why did he protect me? Even when he was old, tired, why didn't he just run? Ramden, because love, real love, doesn't calculate. It doesn't ask, what will I get in return? It simply gives. Without permission, without pride. Birbal didn't save you because he was strong. He saved you because his heart refused to watch someone he loved be harmed. That's loyalty. Gopi, that's the kind of heart this world forgets, but remembers too late. Gopi, but he was just a dog. People laughed at him, called him useless. Ramden, a soul is a soul, son, whether it walks on 2 legs or 4. This world judges by the noise someone makes. If you're quiet, kind, patient, they say you're weak. But the strongest ones, they never need to shout. Birbal never barked at the world. He just watched, listened, and when the time came, he acted. Gopi, why do good ones always go away? Ramden, maybe because they've already done what they came for. Maybe God sends them not to stay forever, but to teach us what we're forgetting. In Birbal's silence, he taught us how to protect. In his pain, he showed us courage. And in his death, he gave us a question. Will you love like this too? Gopi, quietly, I don't know if I can. Ramden, you don't have to do it all at once. Just start by being better than yesterday. Speak kindly. Share without being asked. Stand up when it's easier to look away. Don't wait for the world to clap for you. Let your heart be your applause. Gopi, but people will still laugh, like they laughed at you for keeping him. Ramden, let them laugh. Let them talk. Let them point fingers while doing nothing. One day, they'll realize the ones they mocked were the ones keeping the world gentle. Being good is never weakness. Gopi, it's the rarest kind of strength. Gopi looks down at the little patch of soil where Birbal rests, then places a small stone over it, a gesture of remembrance. Gopi, Baba, can I tell my friends about Birbal? Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't throw stones at street dogs anymore. Ramden smiles gently. That's how change begins. One story, one heart at a time, not with speeches or punishments, but with understanding. Tell them that a dog saved a boy not because he was trained to, but because he chose to. And ask them, would you do the same? Gopi, he was braver than most men. Ramden, he was humaner than most men. A soft breeze rustles the neem leaves. Ramden looks up at the stars. Ramden, you know, people spend their whole lives building houses, chasing money, collecting respect. But all of it disappears the moment we're gone. What stays is how we lived, who we protected, what we gave when we had nothing. Birbal didn't leave behind land or gold, but he left behind a story, one that will outlive even me. Gopi, I think he was my best friend. Ramden touches his shoulder. Then honor him by living like one. Protect the weak. Listen before you speak. And always, always choose kindness, even when the world doesn't. A moment of silence passes between them. Fireflies dance in the dark. Ramden's wife appears at the doorway, listening silently. She speaks after a pause. Mother, I once thought bringing home that dog was foolish, a waste of food, a burden. But now I realize we weren't feeding him. He was feeding us lessons we didn't know we needed. Ramden, sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest truths. Mother, the world needs more Birbals. But it starts with raising more Ramdens and Gopis. Gopi turns back to the grave, wipes a tear and whispers more to himself than anyone else. Gopi, thank you, Birbal, for choosing us, for loving us, for reminding me that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they just wag their tails. Ramden, and sometimes, son, they die quietly, without asking for anything, leaving behind a silence louder than thunder, and a story that turns into a compass for others. They sit together under the neem tree, the moonlight glowing down softly. Nothing more is said, and nothing more needs to be. Sometimes, the greatest lessons in life come from those who speak the least. Birbal, the old dog, never uttered a word, never gave a speech, never demanded praise. Yet in his final act, he taught something that generations of words failed to deliver: the meaning of unconditional love, the value of silent loyalty, and the courage to sacrifice without expecting anything in return. What do we learn from a dog like Birbal? We learn that true loyalty doesn't come from strength. It comes from the heart. Birbal didn't fight because he was young or powerful. He fought because he couldn't watch harm come to the ones he loved. He didn't think twice. He didn't weigh his options. In that one moment, he made a choice to protect, even if it cost him everything. And isn't that the definition of love? Too often, we measure love by what we receive. We ask, what will I get if I give my time, my care, my heart? But Birbal's story turns that question upside down. Real love asks, what can I give, even if I get nothing back? That lesson, though wrapped in a dog's sacrifice, applies to all of us. In our families, how often do we forget to appreciate the quiet givers? The ones who cook without complaint, who work without recognition, who stay behind the scenes holding everything together. We ignore them until something is lost. But Birbal reminds us, true love is usually silent, and we must learn to see it before it's too late. In our communities, how quickly do we judge those who seem weak, old, or unworthy? Birbal was mocked. He was seen as useless. Yet in the end, he saved the very ones who had overlooked him. This teaches us, never underestimate someone because of their age, silence, or condition. The most powerful hearts often beat quietly. In our daily lives, we chase success, applause, and validation. But Birbal didn't seek approval. He didn't wait to be celebrated. He acted out of instinct, out of heart, out of duty. And this is where we find the deepest truth. A good deed is only truly good when it's done without expecting a return. Birbal also teaches us about presence. He didn't change the world. He didn't go far. But in one small home, in one simple act, he changed the life of a child forever. That's the power of purpose. You don't have to be famous to be meaningful. You just have to be there in the right moment for the right reason. And that's a lesson we must carry. You matter. Your actions matter, even when no one sees. We also learn something about time. Birbal didn't have long. His days were numbered, but he used what he had wisely. He loved, he gave, he protected. That shows us it's not how long you live. It's how you live. In the end, it's not the years in your life, but the life in your years that truly counts. There is also a message for children. Gopi learned from Birbal, not through lectures, but through example. Kindness, courage, loyalty, these can't be taught in books alone. They are absorbed by watching. And that's why we, as parents and elders, must live with the values we want our children to carry. If you want the next generation to love without judgment, to care for animals, to respect loyalty, to protect the innocent, then let them see you doing it first. Let them see you feeding the stray, standing up for what's right, and showing love even to those who can't repay you. And finally, we learn a deep, timeless truth. A hero is not always someone who wears armor or flies in the sky. A hero is someone who sees danger and still steps forward. Someone who is tired, but still chooses to protect. Someone who knows the end is near, but still gives everything. Birbal was a hero, not because he saved a boy, but because he showed us what real love looks like. He showed us that even when the world mocks you, even when you're weak, forgotten, and broken, you still have the power to make a difference. You still have the ability to be the reason someone else lives, smiles, or learns. That is his gift. And now, it's ours to carry forward. So, the next time you pass a stray animal, or ignore someone who looks unimportant, or feel like your efforts don't matter, remember Birbal, and ask yourself, can I be a little more loyal today? A little more kind, even when it's hard? Can I give, even if no one notices? If the answer is yes, then Birbal's story lives on, not just in memory, but in action. And that is the greatest gift of all.